You invest in all sorts of interesting technologies, robotics, quantum computing. Maybe you could start by giving us sort of your lane in venture capital, because it is pretty unique what you do at Playground.
Yeah, a lot of people think of it as deep tech, which can be defined as investing in things that almost certainly won't work, but will be consequential if they do, right? A less flippant version of that is that there are new advances in science and engineering that are ready to be translated into commercial utility, and we like being first in those kinds of categories. So stuff that moves civilization forward that's really, really hard, but important if it works.
So what are examples of those categories?
So obviously quantum computing is very topical this week. It's a new class of computation that I think can dramatically change most aspects of industry, commerce, and science. We are broadly invested in computation, everything from the light sources we use to make advanced semiconductors to the AIs that run on top and everything else in between. And then embodying compute and intelligence in robots to do useful work in the real world, as well as biology at the boundary of computation and life sciences.
A major investor in Agility Robotics as well, which is a big Amazon partner.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. You know, AIs need to act on the world, right? And so that means mechatronics and having them actually do useful work in the real physical world that we humans live in.
But not self-driving cars.
No, you know, it was interesting. I was watching a Waymo caught behind a bus here, and look, I think there are many classes of technologies which are more useful than others. And while I admire the work in self-driving cars, it's unclear whether cities actually get better or worse in the presence of such things, right?
They're just so ubiquitous here. It's surprising how much Waymo has really taken off, and maybe it's not scalable across the country. Is this sort of a San Francisco city phenomenon?
Look, I think autonomous vehicles are inevitable, right? But I still think they are decades from ubiquity. And, you know, how are we doing with other challenges that could have used that capital? Like, how are we doing with cancer? There are things that you can do that just aren't as leveraged as other possibilities.
Well, let's talk about quantum. We mentioned it a little bit. You guys are major investors in Quantum. Let's start with the Microsoft news this week. What was the impact? What's your takeaway from the chip that Microsoft announced?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of excitement this week. I think for me, it's a recognition that the leaders of the most important tech companies on Earth all agree that quantum is incredibly important, that you need very large machines, sort of million qubit machines to do anything useful, and some really interesting physics that was published in the journal Nature this week. Our takeaway is that it provides clear evidence of momentum, but the physics is a work in progress. It may translate into really important engineering and really important commercial utility, but there's still some work to do, right? The exotic physics that Microsoft is pursuing is incredibly exciting, but it's a step along a journey that will ultimately yield something useful, but it's unclear when.
It's very theoretical at this point that you were describing when we spoke earlier, that it's not really here now. It is sort of this big idea of, oh, here's what's actually possible in the future. Is that accurate?
Well, the paper that was published was really good science in developing technologies to measure the existence of these theoretical particles. I actually think they're onto something. I actually think those particles will be useful at some point in the future for building first a qubit and then millions of qubits. But I think that work is still yet to be completed. And
the way it was described was sort of this new form of matter. Is that the way you think about it? And is this something they're discovering or creating?
Yeah, so they're looking for a theoretical particle that was proposed in the 30s that, if real, and if you can build systems that manipulate it, could make quantum computers more resilient to noise, right? So the art of the quantum computer is isolating it from the universe as much as you can, so your computations don't drown in noise while they're being done. And this is one solution to that problem.
So, and it's noise and temperature as well. That's part of it?
Well, yeah, so part of what you need to do to keep a quantum computer from stumbling over the errors it makes is to keep it very, very cold, keep it physically isolated from the outside world. And you need to keep it 100 times colder than deep space, and you need to very, very carefully manipulate those physical systems to get it to do what you want it to do. And there's lots of different ways of building these machines, using photons, using electrons, spin qubits, neutral atoms, nitrogen vacancies, lots of different physical systems, but all of them depend on keeping the machine away from the rest of the universe. And that actually has other intriguing flip sides that are going to yield commercial utility this year, not in years or decades.
So this year versus what Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, said could be decades. You think we're sort of here now?
Well, the quantum computers we have right now already do things which are impossible for classical machines. And the Google Willow hardware demonstrated that last year, right? That there are questions you can ask a quantum computer and get the right answer that a normal computer the size of the moon wouldn't be able to answer in any reasonable time. That said, we haven't got machines that are big enough or have high enough quality to answer the impossible questions we really want to know about how our most important drugs work, about how to actually do chemistry, right? That we're sort of stumbling around in the dark without these machines. And so there's a trajectory of bigger and better machines will get you there, so 1 million qubits get you there. Also, the quantum algorithms are improving about 1,000 times faster than the hardware is improving. And so it feels like we're really approaching a point of convergence in the next handful of years, not decades.
What are some of the tangible potential use cases? You mentioned chemistry, drug discovery. Why are people so excited? What types of problems could this solve?
Yeah, well, look, the idea that we have mastery over the physical world, mastery over chemistry, belies the fact that our classical computers fail us when we are trying to simulate the quantum mechanical nature of nature, right? That the way drugs work, the way chemistry works, depends on quantum mechanics. And unlike classical computers, quantum computers can directly simulate that behavior. And that allows us to design things instead of just discover things, right? That all our drugs, we've gone into the Amazon, we've pulled bark off trees, we've seen how many mice die, and we've tried to make an oncology drug just by guessing and trying to optimize around stuff we discover. But being able to design materials directly, to be able to design chemistry, drugs, catalysts, requires a tool where we can simulate nature, and the quantum computers are the first ones that can actually do that.
And that's a massive paradigm shift if you're going from drug discovery to drug creation in a way, I would think.
Yeah, and look, we have hints of exotic materials that have magical properties that we've stumbled upon. Things like superconductors, right, which are the foundational technologies that Microsoft and others are using to try and build their quantum machines. We don't really know how they work, right? The type 2 superconductors, the mechanism is a mystery, but they can do this magical thing of conducting power without without losing power and energy to the environment. And that allows us to do things like build motors of unprecedented capability and efficiency, power transformation, but even to build the next generation of computers with superconductors, if we could only design them, right? If we could only understand the physical mechanisms that is making that superconductivity work in these high temperature devices, it would unlock trillions of dollars of value. And just that one class of materials is indicative of a much broader set of things that we want to be able to do but physically can't right now.
And can you talk about those different approaches? PsiQuantum is using photons. What are sort of the other competing options out there? And even their design looks a little bit different. Is there a way to sort of boil that down for the average person?
So the top level difference is most quantum computers are built out of matter, and PsiQuantum and a few others are built out of light. And the nice thing about photons is that they don't interact with the universe the way that electrons and ions and atoms do. And so they're much, much easier to keep isolated, and it's much easier to maintain the quantum state. And look, I think the Microsoft approach, the approach that Google is using, and many others are all very much about tight control at extremely low temperatures of matter, rather than using photons, which are manufacturable, right? That we've had fiber optic cables for a long time, all our data centers are wired together with fiber optics, and taking advantage of the fact that we have trillions of dollars invested in silicon photonics, in fiber optic cables. Photons become a really strong candidate for building large machines, and their physics is well understood, right? We actually know how photons work, and it's not a theoretical piece of physics we need to get working before you can build a machine.
Why haven't Google and Microsoft in that case, Amazon maybe in that bucket as well, why haven't they gone the photon route?
Yeah, so the reason for that, I would posit, is that PsiQuantum uniquely sought to build a very large machine from day one, right? And so there's a million ways of making one qubit, there's really only one way of making a million. And so they looked at it through the lens of manufacturability, how do we make arbitrarily large ones, as opposed to making small devices and scaling up, right? It's easy to make a handful, or 0 or 1 or 2 of these things. We're in the hundreds to thousands now with some of these physical systems. But you need a million to do anything really useful. And scaling up from 1 or 2 or 10 is rather like trying to get to the moon by climbing successively taller trees, right? You need a different technology. You really need a rocket.
That's a great analogy. What about Google? They seem to be sort of the consensus leader here. Is that how you think about their position?
Yeah, and to be clear, there's a lot of very accomplished people doing remarkable things in these small machines. And Willow is the best quantum computer on the planet at the moment. A really extraordinary result where they demonstrated that they could correct errors faster than the machine would make them by adding more qubits. That's a great result that points towards being able to build large systems. And of course, they did demonstrate this abstract algorithm that showed that quantum computers can definitely outperform classical computers. But the machine PsiQuantum is making is 10,000 times the size of Willow. So you do need to continue to scale that into something that's useful. And scaling factors of 10,000 are, they happen in computation, right? They've happened because of Moore's law, but they don't happen overnight, and they don't happen without a bunch of capital and very clever people staying up late to build out those technologies.
I wonder about the approach and sort of the thinking from one of these big tech companies. PsiQuantum is very specifically working on this problem, but Google, Microsoft, Amazon have all these other businesses. Does it signal to you that they see this as the future of computing, and why is it important, do you think, for a lot of these companies? Yeah,
so I think the activities over the last couple of months have indicated that the leaders of these giant tech firms understand that AI is not a panacea, that it's incredibly powerful technology for lots and lots of things, but it won't do you any good trying to simulate a quantum system where you can't produce training data, right? AIs are only as good as the data that you train the AI on, and if we can't simulate quantum systems like chemistry, then we can't produce good training data to make AIs. And I think that realization is now very much part of the public discourse, and recognize that I think you can have an honest discussion about whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, but it's increasingly inevitable and imminent, and that it will be a partner to existing high-performance computing, existing AI, and but it is the most important step in us getting agency over our physical world, and that seems to be broadly understood at the top levels of these companies now.
And then at the bottom layer of all of this, a lot of these big tech companies are working on semiconductors. Can you sort of explain the tie between the semiconductors, the projects that the big tech companies are working on, and the eventual result and the larger quantum computers?
So semiconductors are the most advanced technology humanity has created so far. Trillions of dollars have gone into building incredibly exotic devices with extraordinary properties, right? That lie at the center of geopolitics. Our ability to make advanced semiconductors, none of which we make in the US at the moment, is really important for our technological future. And that none of these machines could have been made without leveraging the trillions of dollars that have gone into semiconductors broadly. That's true of every one of those devices, every different modality, all depends on our ability to fabricate tiny things at extreme fidelities. And I think that, the quantum computing will not replace all classical computing. It won't replace AI. They are complementary technologies. But I do see opportunities for a co-development between quantum computing. I mentioned being able to invent superconducting logic to build computers that run, classical computers that run hundreds of times faster than our current systems, and switch at maybe 1/100th of the power of our common system. So we're now in a point where the ecosystems will inform each other and amplify each other in interesting ways.
I think that's one part of this whole picture that is mind-blowing for a lot of people. It's sort of the intersection between AI and quantum computing. Is there an easy way to break that down and describe sort of how they're related?
Yeah, in the near term, NVIDIA has actually done a great job of this. There are great AI tools that can help with designing some aspects of quantum computers, and AI tools will have a huge influence over the way we design chips, the way we lay out chips. So in the near term, it's a helpful set of tools to advance the architecture of quantum computing. In the future, I think there's a really important modality, which is once you have a quantum computer, once you can actually explore the quantum nature of nature, you can produce training data to train AIs. And that there will be this idea of quantum inference where if I train a model using a quantum computer, I can subsequently use that model on classical GPUs to produce utility. And I think that's a modality, an interaction between quantum computing and AI that most people overlook.
It seems like there's just such a wide gap between some of the estimates of when this is actually going to be commercially viable. Do you think Jensen may walk back that multi-decade horizon? Was he hedging there?
Look, I think very, very clever people are occasionally wrong, especially when it serves their commercial interests. I do think there are going to be results this year that hint towards real quantum utility for commercial applications. And arguably, in the quantum sensing world, there are already things that are changing people's lives. Technology that started off as a quantum computing modality is now being used to make ordinary MRI machines 100,000 times more sensitive and allow them to directly image cancer metabolism. That is a shipping product that exists and is an example of quantum utility in the marketplace. Technologies to see 2 kilometers underground to find the critical minerals for the energy transformation, right? There are companies that have taken the exhaust from the development of quantum computers and built things which we've never had before. That's already happened. There is a class of quantum enhanced algorithms I expect to demonstrate commercial utility this year, even on small machines, by accelerating a small part of a classical algorithm with quantum mechanics. And then the prize of the really big machines, the million qubit machines, we know is only a handful of years away. And we have 2 from PsiQuantum that we're about to break ground on, one in Australia and one in Chicago. That is, we will be pouring concrete and running cables and starting the construction of those machines that will be running in a handful of years.
Are there use cases that just are never going to be suited for quantum? Are there things that folks should just ignore when it comes to quantum computing?
Yeah, don't like large language models. Anything that is large data and small computation is not advantaged by a quantum machine. The optimization problems, physics problems, how we design fusion reactors, how we design superconductors, how we explore this incredible design space that is open to us right now, I think are the most extraordinary applications. And then what comes afterwards, right? If you can design a drug or a room temperature superconductor, it creates this nexus of opportunity to build all kinds of things that we've only imagined. And it's like waking up one day with a billion new elements on the periodic table, all of which have interesting properties to tackle our most difficult diseases, our most pressing needs, to build worlds of abundance that we can't really imagine now because we just don't know how to make those things. We can only stumble across some of them.
What about energy in all of this? AI is quite energy intensive,
yeah.
and that's been part of the big discussion with data centers. What's the possibility to solve some of these energy issues with quantum?
So there are new material systems that allow us to do computation at a tiny fraction of the current power that we use.
Mm-hmm.
And actually some of our other portfolio companies are really directly addressing how you get more computation out of less power. Mm. And there are degrees of freedom that physics allows to, as I said, make things run thousands of times faster with 1,000 times less power. And those devices actually exist. What's missing is some of the ways of making them scalable and manufacturable. And so Moore's law is not dead, right? It's only resting. And in a world where we can design materials, not just discover them, the degrees of freedom to progress computation, to progress technologies to to create power efficiently, to be able to address the biggest challenges with decarbonization. There's never been a richer set of tools available to us.
What do you make of the public market reaction? There's a handful of publicly traded stocks that do quantum. After the Willow chip was announced, there was just so much excitement in the market. You saw these stocks on an absolute tear last year. They're extremely volatile. What do you make of some of the near-term hype?
So I was amazed that anything with a Q in the ticker symbol went up when Willow came out, and went down when Jensen threw cold water on everything. Look, I think one of the challenges with AI, and we saw this with DeepSeek and with quantum, is that the nuance of what's really happening is often lost on the broader market. One thing I'm personally very passionate about is that we live in a technology based on science. We live in a civilization built on science and technology where nobody understands science and technology. And what's great about these kinds of conversations is to be really clear about what the roadmaps look like, what the expectation is, how the technology works, so people can make informed decisions about where to deploy capital. But take Stargate, for example, right? A $500 billion effort to create computation, which is an amazing goal. But rather than spending $500 billion constructing on existing technology, take $500 million to invent something that could make that cost 10 times less or 100 times less. And there are technologies that will do that are ready to translate into the real world, that for a limited amount of focused capital can really dynamically change the build out of these giant systems. And we just need to be sensible about spend the money on the leveraged research and development rather than on production. And let's get the technologies that we feel good about before we scale them. And we've seen half a dozen examples of that in the last couple of months, and I think it's time to focus on get the technology right, deploy the capital early, and then scale when you have something that's Promethean fire.
Is it going to be up to just private markets at this point? It doesn't seem like, you mentioned Stargate is sort of this big flashy example of a lot of dollars going into one problem. In the meantime, if that isn't the case, where government money is going into this in a more specific way, is it just going to be venture doing this?
Well, so look, I think deep tech venture has an absolutely critical role to play in this. We are organized to underwrite technical risk, to retire technical risk, to deploy early stage capital. And so we certainly have, I feel, a deep responsibility to deploy capital efficiently. The US government, of course, does a lot of this basic research in various forms in national labs. But if you look at the capital in chips and science, for example, a lot of it is focused on production, not on primary research. And that in various points in American history, we have always led the world, or we have led the world in research and development that turned into these magical technologies. I think we need to be spending more time thinking about that. And AI is an opportunity to be a focusing function for that, as is quantum, as is advanced semiconductors and EV lithography and the fundamentals that we're all built on top of.
And there is sort of a geopolitical layer to all of this. China is working on quantum computers too, as well as AI and semis, as you mentioned. What is the threat from China, just in terms of US maybe leading in this space, and how would you compare the progress from East versus West?
Well, it's also interesting to compare that framing to what's going on with AI, with DeepSeek, right? That $1 trillion swing in the market was precipitated by a couple of very good young engineers doing very good software optimization, right? A normal expected thing along the trajectory of development of AI, and that had fairly dramatic consequences in the market. The quantum computing lens is a little bit different because it requires complicated supply chains, it requires exotic materials, it requires advanced semiconductor technologies. And I think the US has a leadership position in most of those, but it will only hold that if we continue to make the right investments in progressing those technologies. It's much easier to stay ahead than to prevent the other guys from catching up. And when you compare, candidly, the amount of money that's going into preparing for a possible future conflict, again, if you put that money into R&D and just stay ahead, then the imperatives for that will be greatly reduced. And so I'm a huge advocate for American exceptionalism in technology and maintaining its lead. And I think if we continue to do that, we will be able to build things a decade ahead of anybody else. We are not there yet, but I think the degrees of freedom of technologies we can invest in to do that are very broad.
That's a great point, and especially on some of the materials needed and all the supply chains. It's fascinating. I mean, this is such a great conversation. While I have you, I want to talk a little bit about humanoid robotics, another piece of deep tech you guys are investing deeply in. Where are we on the humanoid side of things? I was asking Peggy from Agility when we'll have humanoid robots doing our laundry. That seems like a big milestone for people. But when will those become ubiquitous, or will they? Are they just more designed to work in warehouses and do the dangerous sort of dirty jobs that they describe?
Yeah, so it really comes down to, I think, people have a tendency to anthropomorphize things and anthropomorphize AI, and so humanoid robots, it's sort of natural that we would want to embody intelligence in something that kind of looked like us. Now, in reality, the amazing human dexterity and our intelligence and our proprioception and we're really inexpensive to manufacture. I mean, we're kind of amazing things, and humanoid robots aren't going to be competitive with us on all things anytime soon. But there's certainly today a class of kind of boring jobs in logistics, in light manufacturing, in environments where humans want to work in and around robots, where humanoid robots are already capable of ROI, right? They're already good enough to be able to do useful work in and around people. I think there's a class of robotics which is really focused on amplifying people, not replacing them. To have co-workers that allow our intelligence and dexterity to be amplified by a robotic system. But look, I think it's inevitable, like self-driving cars, that humanoid robots will ultimately be ubiquitous. But it's going to be a while before a robot can look under the couch for your mom's, contact lens. It's, that amount of perception, that amount of dexterity, and that amount of intelligence is going to take a while. But I think Agility has demonstrated that you can build robots that are practical, that are designed for the practical application, not designed to be shiny metal puppets. And I think that the fact that they are going to work every day doing useful work is indicative of that.
What other areas of deep tech should we keep an eye on? We've talked about robotics and quantum. What's interesting in your world that might not be on our radar yet? Well,
I've spoken to it quite a bit. Civilization is built on computation. Semiconductors are important. The technologies that we can build those with are changing at every layer of the stack at a pace which we have never seen before. And so we are really focused on that. Once you have better computers, once you have quantum computers, you can deploy them against our most difficult diseases. So, building therapeutics, programmable RNA, technologies that can tackle our most difficult diseases are enabled by AI, quantum computing, and advanced computation. I think that we really do need to find technologies to transform our, the way we create and use energy and the way we apply energy to changing materials to do useful things. There are ways we can make iron and steel and metal without burning coal. that are green, not in that they don't emit carbon, they're green and they make a lot of money. I think those domains are particularly fertile for future investment. But I think there's a broad category of the underpinnings of what we're doing with quantum, the underpinnings of what we're doing with exploring nature, that allow us to build quantum, not just quantum hardware and quantum algorithms, but these quantum sensing technologies. So a humble robin can see a magnetic field, right? It's literally within their visual field, and that's how they navigate, right? We can build technologies to navigate without GPS, right? We can take advantage of some of the things that have already been invented by biology and translating that into navigation. But long term, I think the biggest thing that all of these technologies are going to influence is our agency over nature and biology in ways that produce abundance that we really can't imagine right now. And rather than living in this Malthusian zero-sum game, that we know how to make plants 2 to 10 times more efficient than they currently are. They're very pretty, but they were designed 3 billion years ago, and they're far from optimal, right? We know how to create materials, food, medicine in ways that we could only dream of. And those, again, the tools to do that are years, not decades away.
These are really big swings too. You alluded to this at the beginning. This is sort of the nature of how you guys invest. They're really big moonshot ideas. You've had a long career in tech. Do you look back and think of any of the things that maybe didn't work, that you thought at the time, oh, this is going to be game-changing for civilization, and it just flopped? I would think there's examples along the way.
Well, it's easy to tease people about, getting excited about the metaverse and, social media and iPhone apps and various other things. Look, I think there are technologies that were imminent, decades ago, right? We've been working on fusion for more than for about a century, right? And fusion is an important technology, but it's not imminent, right? It's really hard. It's really, really hard. And no amount of entrepreneurial zeal is going to overcome the dynamics of plasma physics. So, but nearly all of the things that haven't happened really haven't happened yet. And I'm super optimistic about revisiting things that were declared dead in the 60s, then declared dead in the 90s, and they come around, and there's a change in the physics, and there's a change in our ability to manipulate materials, and they come back. And we have a pipeline of some really, they sound like science fiction, but they are quite close to realization. And super excited about having the opportunity to work with the entrepreneurs doing that work.
It's a great point about timing. Peter, this is fascinating. Thank you so much for going so deep and explaining a lot of this, because these are really deep, complicated topics. So this is great to have you here. Thank you again.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.